First, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and also thanks to those who submitted questions. We would like to request that all attendees stay muted during this town hall. Town hall will be recorded and posted to the OI Elections webpage. My co-moderator is Catherine Walton Elliott from the endorsement team, waving her hand. That's nice. And she will be monitoring the chat for questions. You're all invited to submit questions during tonight's town hall, and we'll do our best to address those. I'd like to turn the program over to Catherine so you can get to know her and ask her to state our native land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Ed. We would like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still inhabit the area today, the Stachas Band of Indigenous people of the Squaxin Island tribe. We recognize that this acknowledgement is only a first step as we work toward reconciliation.
Thank you, Catherine. Before we get started with questions, I'd like to mention that on June 4th, starting at 6:30, OI will be offering another town hall with two candidates running for Thurston County Commission District 2. You can register for that event on the OI Elections webpage, and there will be a little bit more information about that at the end of the meeting. This evening, we're pleased to have Syd Locke join us. Syd worked in the state legislature for 30 years, and most recently as a senior legislative aide to Representative Steve Berquist of the 11th District. Syd has stated his opposition to the three initiatives that will be on the ballot in the fall. Before we get to questions, I'd like to ask Syd to take a few minutes to tell about himself and his campaign. Turning it over to you, Syd.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone and give my praise to Olympia Indivisible, because you've done great work over the years, informing voters and getting Democrats elected. And the Republican Party has really gone kind of off the rails and for quite a few years now, actually. But so I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for giving me this time to talk about my campaign, our campaign. The campaign is going well. I felt like I decided to run because, first of all, I feel like I'm very well qualified, and people encouraged me to run because I've worked as staff up at the legislature for so many years. There were a few things that I felt like I could bring. I come from a tradition of I'm a democratic socialist, like come from the tradition of like Bernie Sanders and AOC and the Squad, sort of that viewpoint. And I think we need more people with that viewpoint in the legislature. Also, there was a lot of rallies and emails and marches about what's going on in Gaza. And unfortunately, there was no legislator in the House or the Senate from either party who introduced legislation making any kind of House Joint Memorial or Senate Joint Memorial or a resolution. And I felt like this was the trail of tears of our time. And I really wanted someone to speak out on it, and was disappointed that no one did. And that's kind of compelled me to do something. I really wanted the Biden administration to change course. I'm not unhappy with the Biden administration in a lot of areas, but this was one area where I felt like he needed to change course, not only to save lives, but also I feel like, especially with young people, he needs to get them on board, because the voter turnout will be a lot lower than, say, for Obama. So that was a triggering event for me to kind of throw my hat in the ring. Campaign's going well. I'm learning a lot. I'm knocking on doors. We've got a team, and I feel like I can bring my experience and my perspective, where I think of things as healthcare, housing, and as human rights, not as expensive commodities that some people can afford and others can't. I think we need to have an economy that is based on how people give people what they need to flourish, what they not just to survive, but to thrive. And that's what I want to do, bring that perspective.
Thank you. I'll get on with the first question that was posed by an OI member. And at the close of candidate filing, you withdrew your candidacy from the LD 22 Senate seat and filed to be a candidate for the LD 22 House seat. What caused you to change your mind concerning which position to seek?
Well, at the first, I was going to run for the House, and talking with people, including my spouse, we decided that we didn't want to run against Maria Seguenza for a number of reasons. And then we thought we had a good chance of good chance to win in the Senate if there was a Republican. Historically, a Republican is always filed in the House and the Senate. Even if they don't run a particularly strong campaign, they'll usually get like 33%. We switched to the Senate because we felt like somebody with my perspective needs to be in the legislature. And the best chance of winning at that time, we thought, was in the Senate, where we would have a crowded Democratic field and one Republican. And say if the Republican got 33% and there were 4 Democrats splitting the other 67%, that I would probably get a lot of Bernie supporters, maybe some low-wage workers, and advance against a Republican. And then because it's such a Democratic district, I would have an easier time in the general election and win. We don't take corporate money, so you know, it would be hard when the Republican decided not to file. I waited to the last day, including to the last hour, because we really thought these three people, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, were going to file for these seats. And when they didn't, I finally, after talking to a lot of people, we decided to make the switch because it would be really tough to run against some well-funded candidates with good name recognition in both the primary and the general election. So by switching to the House seat now, because there's only 2 people who will both advance to the general election, we can our campaign can save our resources and better compete for the general election.
How do you see the roles of the state representatives and the state senators differ?
Well, I mean, there's a huge overlap. There's a huge overlap of what they do. I mean, senators have, of course, 4-year terms, and it gives them, more. They don't have to campaign as often. But, the Speaker of the House certainly has a lot more power than, say, a freshman senator. So it really depends, on if a senator is holding, the chair of Ways and Means, or if the senator is just a freshman on a committee compared to somebody who's been in the House for a long time. It's not like a really easy calculus about, who has more power. It really depends on what, chairs they hold. So things like that.
Okay. Switching topics, First question from an OI member has to do with your questionnaire answer to a top priority for you, which would be to, quote, stand up for peace and justice in Palestine. We're going back to your initial statements and your call for a permanent ceasefire. The question from the member is, would this ceasefire be unconditional, or would Hamas need to release hostages? And what does justice for the Palestinians mean to you?
Well, I'm not a supporter of Hamas. I mean, let's make that clear. But I think there's two things that could be done. There's the immediate ceasefire, and then there's the long-term process for peace and justice in Palestine. Israel did have information ahead of time that Hamas was planning an invasion. And what Hamas did, especially, taking civilian hostages, having civilians involved, is wrong, and I condemn that. But I feel like if Israel completely overreacted, and right now the United Nations is saying it's a lot of officials in the United Nations are saying that it's a genocide. If they would have just, for some reason, I don't know if it was incompetence or for some other reason, when Hamas came across the border, Israel had taken a lot of its security away at that time. If they would have just, strengthened that border again, because it would have been secure for a long time, then we would have saved many, many lives and the trauma that even the survivors are having. So I felt like Israel completely overreacted. We could have exchanged hostages. Israel could have supported that border. And then, of course, the Palestinians have, we can't just think of the history starting in last October. We have to go back 75 years, and the Palestinians with the right of return. And they have tried other ways. There was the Great March of Return, which was a nonviolent protest, and there were Israeli snipers that were shooting nonviolent protesters and medics from like a football field away with high-powered rifles with scopes. And if a kid threw a rock, they couldn't reach the sniper. The greatest Major League Baseball pitcher couldn't reach, throw a rock 100 yards and hit a sniper. So so the short term is, I laid that out. In the long term, I'm not saying it needs to be a one-state or two-state solution. It's really not my place, but I think that we can't have an apartheid state in Israel's been, Palestinians do not have the same rights as Israelis, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you. Our next topic, and we're going to totally shift gears, is focused on the environment. In your questionnaire, you call yourself an eco-socialist, and you advocate for a statewide Green New Deal. What do you mean by the term eco-socialist?
Well, I think that we need to have things like we need public power. We need to make sure that power generation and distribution needs to be not for profit, but needs to be controlled by the state or with co-ops or something that's not built on profit. I think that that's something that we need to do. And Green New Deal was, AOC is kind of a lead on it in the at the federal level, but I'd like to, gradually get it out of the hands of profit-making companies so we can, look, we're at a crisis period, and for instance, even in Thurston County, and we have lots of progressive Democrats here in Thurston County. In 2018, we had a Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. It says we're going to cut emissions by 45% by 2030. And we're a little bit more than halfway there. And how far have we gotten to that 45%? We're almost at zero. We're like at 2 or 3%. And now we're supposed to cut emissions by another 40 some odd percent by 2030. So I think that's what I think people are starting to think, that we need more drastic solutions. And this is statewide too.
Are there any specifics of the mechanics of how that could be achieved? How you would go about the transition to developing those public initiatives to take over?
Yeah, I mean, like Puget Sound Energy, we could take over that. Because look, we're at an emergency. So either through initiative or through the state legislature passing legislation, we have to come to the conclusion that property rights don't take precedent over our very survival. So I would work with all kinds of people, but I think we need to get those fundamentals down. Is that, we're failing at something that's an existential crisis. So we need to do something major. And so, we can look at other countries. I would definitely work with other people. But the first step is to get people to admit that, what we're doing is not enough. It's like we have 10 holes in the boat and we plug one hole, and we might feel good about plugging that one hole, but the ship is still sinking. So, I mean, I'm not going to lay out like a 17-point plan about how to get it done, but I'll definitely work with other people on how to get it done.
Understood. I'm going to move on to another topic of healthcare. And in your questionnaire, you mentioned supporting a statewide single-payer universal healthcare system modeled after the whole Washington plan. Could you tell us a little bit about the whole Washington plan?
Yeah, it would be, they've had a bill in the legislature and it doesn't really go anywhere. A lot of times it doesn't get a hearing, but it's a Washington Health Trust. So it would basically, it would get rid of these complicated maze of many insurance companies. And it would be a single payer universal healthcare system. It would have a tax on employers and a smaller tax on employees. But so it would, they had a study from professor at, I think it was University of Massachusetts Amherst. He said it would save this Washington State businesses and consumers $9 billion a year. The first year would probably be like 1 billion, but after they got it going, it would be like $9 billion a year. So right now, I think we have to admit that the healthcare system is not working. I mean, we've done some patching up and everything, but we could do a lot better with a single payer universal system. And the people who work for the insurance companies, we can make sure that they have a job transition, just like just like any other worker, but we need to invest in that too.
What would you say are the major impediments to the establishment? Is it consumer reluctance or opposition from healthcare systems or insurance companies?
Polls say that it's really popular with people. But yeah, insurance companies and the healthcare industry, it's not popular at all, of course. They make good money doing it. So again, as a democratic socialist, I believe that healthcare is a right, and we need to do some drastic things because people's health is fundamental. It's just it's the same thing with climate. If the system isn't working, and we've had plenty of years of seeing that it isn't working for people. There's a lot of people who don't go to the doctor even when they have insurance because they can't afford to go, with the high deductibles and so forth, that they don't go. And so I feel like we need a whole new plan. And whole Washington, they've got physicians on their board, they've got economists on the board, and they put together a plan that I think deserves at least a hearing, for God's sake. I mean, and I think it deserves to be passed.
One of the aspects of healthcare is reproductive healthcare rights. Is there more that needs to be done to make sure those rights are protected for both our state residents and for those from out of state who seek reproductive health care in our state?
Yeah, reproductive health care is absolutely essential and should be part of a robust healthcare system. And I'm strongly pro-choice. I'm strongly for trans rights and healthcare. So those are the things that I completely support, and whole Washington supports that too. What was this? Was that?
No, I think that answers that nicely. Does there need to be more done to protect our citizens and medical providers from legal actions arising in other states concerning care delivered in Washington state?
Yes, and there has been some legislation on that, but we need to absolutely protect healthcare providers. And another thing is, when some healthcare conglomerates are buying up traditionally religious affiliated hospitals, that we need to take a closer look at that to see that they're not that they're paying their taxes, and that they're not using any kind of loopholes, so they can provide the full range of healthcare, because that's been happening, that Providence and so forth. Some of these traditionally religious oriented hospitals are being bought up by huge health conglomerates. So we need to look at that too.
Okay. And shifting topics one more time. I'm going into the topic of small business support, and on the questionnaire, you mentioned elimination of the B&O tax and replacement with a corporate profit tax. Sounds easy, but how likely is it that a new corporate profits tax would be passed?
Well, if we just look at what's likely, we're not going to get a lot done. We need to expand our horizons about what's likely, because what this whole interview, the critique could be what I'm proposing, what I'm advocating for is not likely. But we need to have voices in there to say this is what makes sense if we're taking seriously that people's human rights for healthcare, for housing, and so forth, if we're really serious about it, and for dealing with a climate emergency, that we need to do something more drastic. Having my voice in there will be a positive. It won't be just another, you know, let's tinker with the status quo. I'm saying, what do we really need to do to solve the problem? That's what I would bring to the state legislature. And then I think that that builds momentum. If I just said, well, it's not very likely, so let's give up. That's not me, that's not me. I have to like figure out what's not working and what hasn't been working for years. It's maybe working a little bit or maybe working a lot for some people, but for a lot of people, it's not working at all. You get in there, you build momentum. I think the public is with us. And we need to look at, the power of special interests, including campaign contributions. I don't take corporate campaign contributions. I'm just doing it all on people power. So I take individual donations and I take donations from labor unions because they're organizations of the working class, working people. So that's how I would deal with, people saying it's not likely on this issue. It seems impossible on that issue. I mean, I remember when, gay marriage was considered not likely. And now, it's like, of course, we're going to have gay marriage. But for years, it was like, that's just not likely. So things change, things can change, and things do need to change if we're gonna survive the climate emergency, and if we're going to house people, and if we're going to provide health care.
That's great. And you mentioned in your questionnaire answer supporting the Main Street program. I had not heard of that. Could you explain what the Main Street program is and how that could help small businesses?
Yeah. What did I write in the Main Street program? Yeah, small businesses can be helped. There's a lot of technical advice that can help small businesses. My wife is got a sole proprietorship with she teaches yoga and does massage. There's a lot of things that can be done with making things more accessible, for instance, for small businesses, for so we don't have like an ableist type of society. And helping people navigate their taxes, setting up a business, things like that. Just technical advice.
That's all part of the Main Street program you're talking about.
Yeah, and more. Yeah.
Okay. Another topic is public education, and you state support for increased funding for special education, higher teacher and support staff salaries, and the provision of free higher education. What do you feel is the best way to raise funds for these priorities and other public welfare services such as transportation and healthcare services?
Well, our tax system, as you all know, is very regressive. It's basically upside down. We depend way too much on regressive taxes like the sales tax. And what we do need to do is, first of all, defeat this initiative that would take away the capital gains tax and be a huge hit. And so we need the capital gains tax. We need a wealth tax on intangible property of the ultra rich. I mean, people pay property taxes on their homes and so forth, but the ultra rich aren't paying their fair share property tax on their intangibles. We need to, I haven't given up on getting an income tax in Washington State someday. Most states in the United States have an income tax. We need that. So those are some of the things that we need to do. And it's going to take a lot of work. And I think that we can get it done.
A question came in from an OI member concerning your position on funding school vouchers or charter schools with tax revenue.
No, I don't support vouchers and charter schools. I support fully funding our public schools. Vouchers, especially, no. I think we've been putting money into special education, but I think we need to do more because the state could get sued. I think the case could be made that we're not meeting our obligations or paramount duty to educate all students, and because special education students do need the resources, and education is a right for them too. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't do more that the state would get sued again about special education. We don't want that.
If we move on to the topic of law enforcement, you mentioned support for the agenda of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. Could you explain what that agenda is and elaborate on how it could help the residents of the state?
Yeah, Leslie Cushman, who's with the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, endorsed me in this race. I provided some of the history. I've been involved with Black Lives Matter protests and Surge, standing up for racial justice. Did court support for 2 young Black men a few years ago who were shot by an Olympia police officer. Both of them were shot. One is permanently, disabled, paralyzed from the waist down. I was with the chaplain family. So that's my history as far as police accountability. I think we need independent an independent commission that will do investigations of the police, because a lot of times local prosecutors have too cozy of a relationship with the police. And we need to make sure that community members feel confident in the investigations.
A follow-up question in the same vein as and this is from another OI member, is what would be the single most important legislation that should be passed to reduce gun violence?
Well, gun violence is a huge issue. And I actually think that we need to look broader, that banning guns or not banning guns, that's only one part of the equation. I think we need to have economic stability for people. We need to have behavioral health services for people. We need to have education for people, because a lot of the violence, whether it be gun violence or other kinds of violence, comes from having a society that people feel very insecure in their material needs. So we need to look at gun violence with a broader perspective if we're really going to get a really good picture of it, a holistic approach. I mean, I would support, background checks. I support, restricting, these military style weapons. I totally for all that stuff, but we also need to look at some of the root causes of violence in society.
Okay. Another difficult societal issue is homelessness. And in your questionnaire, you mentioned raising minimum wage and strengthening unions so people can earn enough to afford quality housing. How does a legislator or the legislature strengthen unions?
Well, I mean, Washington State Labor Council has a whole legislative agenda every year. One bill that didn't pass, which we have a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate and a Democratic governor, is a controversial bill that I would support, is unemployment benefits for workers on strike. I think employers really have the upper hand just about everywhere. So that's one bill that I would support that the Democrats unfortunately didn't pass. But every year there's a legislative agenda put forth by the Washington State Labor Council. Just things like workplace safety. Before it was like especially during COVID, masking and ventilation and especially on construction sites, for female construction workers, having a clean place to clean up, all these things that can be put into law that labor unions don't have to negotiate. That's how you strengthen unions, is that, especially like with, for instance, getting a universal health care. I would strengthen unions because that would take away, a bargaining thing that the employer has over labor unions. That if we had universal health care, that would be one less thing that the unions would have to worry about. So their bargaining would narrow down, and they would have more leverage to get, say, for instance, pay increases, because they wouldn't say, oh, well, we're going to get some healthcare and some pay increases. So those are some of the things that we can do to strengthen unions.
Okay. And again, we're going to shift over to another topic, which has to do with the voting system. In your questionnaire, when you commented on the present voting system in Washington, you stated, and I'll quote it, laws and policies should work to increase access to and participation in democratic elections. Could you elaborate and explain which laws and policies and how you would be involved to realize that goal if you were elected to the House?
Well, I support, like, for instance, instant runoff voting, and so I support that, and proportional representation, I think. So IRV is something I strongly support. I think we should do that. And that's generally how we could, make our system more democratic.
A question came in from one of the OI members regarding your opinion on ranked choice voting as opposed to the present primary system.
Yeah, I support ranked choice voting. I think, it helps so people don't have to, candidates are tempted to go negative, for instance, on opponents. And with ranked choice voting, say if there's multiple candidates, you might want to get a lot of second place votes from different, supporters of different candidates. And that would be a way to win. But if you're going negative, you're probably going to alienate those voters who might prefer one candidate. And if you're going negative, you're not going to get that second choice. And with ranked choice, getting those second choices adds up, and you could be the winner.
Thank you. Another question on the questionnaire had to do with collaboration with tribal nations. And you mentioned doing better to coordinate and cooperate on a number of issues. In your position, if elected, how would you achieve that goal of working with tribal nations?
Well, we have to recognize their sovereignty and their rights and work with them, especially with salmon restoration. I think that's a big one. They need to be equal partners. In history of Washington State, that's not always been the case. So I would work with the tribes on all their concerns, environmental concerns, salmon restoration, and really recognize their sovereignty and their treaty rights.
Thank you. I'm going to go into the chat. We have a couple of questions that showed up, and I'll just read these off. So the first one circles back to the environmental topic. Transportation, cars and buses, is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Washington, followed by residential, commercial, and industrial heating. Could you please connect the dots between creating a publicly owned statewide utility district and addressing the two largest sources of greenhouse gas? Because cars and most buildings are privately owned, what is your vision for creating the bold change that you want to see?
Yeah, well, I mean, for instance, the city of Olympia, the buses are free. I'd like to see that statewide so we can get people out of their cars. I think electric cars, they're important. They're making great progress. And in China, you can get it. If they were available here without the tariffs, it would be like $15,000 for an electric car. So I would like to see, I don't support the tariffs against the Chinese electric vehicles, but we need to get people out of their cars altogether. So things like electric bikes, things like free buses, we can invest in high-speed rail if I think we should do that. I mean, a lot of people are negative about China, but they've brought like 800 million people out of absolute poverty. They've got high-speed rail. They are, we can learn from them. And I don't want to see like an adversarial relationship with China. I want to be in partnership and good trading partners. I think, we have too much of an adversarial relationship with China, and it's a nuclear power. So, we're really we have nuclear weapons, they have nuclear weapons. We need to really bring it down a notch and learn from them. So I know I kind of got off topic, but those are some of the things that we can do about as far as transportation.
A follow-up question, well, in a different vein, but another one from the chat was, what do you suggest will be effective means to defeat the ballot initiatives? And what do you personally plan to do between now and November to contribute to that effort?
Well, I mean, education of the voters. And I know Indivisible has done really great work on that for years. And so I really salute you and thank you for that. And when I'm talking to voters, I mentioned that, hey, vote no on all three of those initiatives, because that's what we need to do. So I feel like I've been doing my part just when I'm knocking on doors and talking to people. I've been very clear that I'm strongly opposed to all three initiatives, and I don't waffle one bit on that.
Couple more questions before we wrap things up. One is the question of what legislative action is needed to address the housing crisis in the state. A small question.
Yeah, it's a really important thing, a really important issue. First of all, there's a few aspects to it. Rent is out of control. I was involved with Olympia for All, which passed through the city of Olympia, rent stabilization and tenants' rights city ordinance passed. We were satisfied with it. So there's rent stabilization on that. I'd also like to repeal the state ban on rent control. I would like to have cities and counties be able to have that tool in their toolbox, because there's thousands of people just in the city of Olympia who are, I think it's like 16,000 people in the city of Olympia who are, like very close to losing the roof over their head. Like if their car breaks down, or if they have a dental bill that they have to pay, they're paying such a high percentage of their income to rent that all of a sudden they're in deep trouble if they have an unexpected bill. So there's that as far as renters. For building housing, we need to have density. We can't fudge a little bit by building out in rural areas, expanding, having sprawl. And unfortunately, sometimes we do see that. And what I'd like to do too is, and then this is again different than the traditional liberal way of doing things. We can't just provide incentives to private developers with tax breaks and regulations, especially 20-year tax breaks or something like that, which shifts the tax burden to regular people. we can't just depend on the private market for housing. You know, the city of Seattle is developing social housing where we need to provide the state and local governments with bonding authority. They can contract with you know, directly with the building trades, and we have bonding authority to raise money and to get social housing where you have mixed housing where you have a good percentage of working class people, moderate income people, poor, low income people in a housing unit, and getting the government more involved in building housing, because housing is a human right. And just leaving it up to the private market, we've seen the shortcomings, we've seen the failures. So that's what I would like to do. And I think the city of Seattle is making a start on that.
Another question came in on the chat, which asks about your opponent in the race and mentions that OI hosted the town hall, as I mentioned to you before, with Lisa Parsley. How do you differentiate yourself from her?
Well, I like Lisa, no question. I mean, I don't know her that well, but I definitely like Lisa partially. I think police accountability. I think we were disappointed in the Olympia City Council where there was a Black man who was shot by the Olympia police and killed. Timothy Green, and we felt like there wasn't an independent investigation and police accountability on that. So I say police accountability. The other thing is on housing, like I support these social housing effective where you get the government more involved, especially in financing, building. And Lisa has, you know, I support her on the density parts, but I feel like they still depend too much on private developers and giving tax breaks as a way of incentivizing the building. So I would like to emphasize less on the private developers and get governments, you know, state and local governments involved in building housing, and we can use a state bank too, as far as building the financing.
Okay, well, more generally, you've stated that your top priorities for the 2025 session would be Palestine, raising wages and supporting unions, universal health care, and transitioning away from fossil fuels. If you had to describe what the agenda is for the state legislature as a whole, would those agenda items, priorities match your priorities, or would there be other relevant issues that you're aware of that the legislature might be aimed at for this coming session?
Well, there's so many issues. And I know, like with Palestine, and people are saying that, you know, this is not something that the legislature should do, but I really feel like this is sort of the trail of tears of our era. And people were begging elected officials at every level of government to speak out. And I think that's really important that we do that, because we're going to be remembered in history about what's happening in Palestine right now. So, but there's plenty of issues. I think one of the things that is fully funding our schools, of course, that's always an issue. Public education is so vitally important. You know, making sure that our senior and disabled neighbors, make sure that they have everything that they need to thrive. So there's all kinds of issues.
Yeah, and I may have led you into the landing or the finish line on this town hall, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to wrap up your presentation and ask how we could best serve your campaign if you are endorsed by the OI membership. Give you a few minutes to wrap up on your own statements.
Sure. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate the opportunity. I really admire your work. I've really admired your work for many years. You can support you can go to sydlocke.com, SYDLOCKE.com. You can sign up to volunteer or to make a donation. Like I said before, our campaign is very people powered. We don't take corporate campaign contributions. And the questions have been awesome. And if you have more questions, I'm happy to, just write me. I'm happy to engage in discussion with you and hear your viewpoints. Because a lot of the things that I brought up, are really big, bold moves, and we need everyone together to talk about it and to have horizons that we're really serious about solving these problems, not just making progress while the ship is still sinking, but what's it going to take to really solve these things? So I think a lot of people here in this meeting and the general public really believe that, yeah, it's a human right. Human rights go into the economic realm, like healthcare and housing and education. These are human rights, and we need to deliver on them. So thank you so much, and I'm willing to continue the conversation and engage. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking your time and giving us answers to all these difficult questions. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight. As we end this town hall, I'd like to announce to everybody again that on June 4th, there's another town hall scheduled for 6:30 p.m. to interview two candidates for the County Commissioner race District 2. The candidates are Rachel Drennan and J.W. Foster. Also, planned for June 22nd is a 10 a.m. Zoom endorsement team research presentation of some of the candidates and races that will be on the ballot in the August primary. An OI membership vote for endorsement will follow that presentation over the following week. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending this evening's town hall.